Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua Calkins-Treworgy, also known as Baron of Sidious. And I'd like to welcome you back once again for something I haven't done in a little while, and that is a review. But it's not going to be a review of the sort of material I usually do, because typically I review short stories, novels, or book series, though I haven't done an entire series just yet. But I typically focus on written word format material. That is, just text. But I've talked about it a couple of times. I've recently been getting a little bit back into comic books, and I just finished reading through Oblivion Song. This is the series that we're going to be talking about. Looking at the comic book series by Robert Kirkman of The Walking Dead fame and Lorenzo De Felici, a sci-fi tale entitled Oblivion Song. Before we get into the breakdown of my ratings and takeaways from this series, let's have a brief synopsis of the story. In the mid-2010s, roughly, though it's never specified exactly what year, theoretical physicist Nathan Cole and a team of fellow scientists examine curious energy vibration phenomena in their laboratory in downtown Philadelphia. Tinkering with these energies and experimentally developed equipment, they accidentally cause an event known as the transference, wherein several square miles of the city geographically and 300,000 people from the city swap places with terrain from another world, dubbed Oblivion. Racked with guilt over the incident, especially since his brother Edward was among the 300,000 who vanished over into Oblivion, Nathan determines to go bring as many humans back to Earth from that world as he can. Years go by, and eventually Nathan finds and recovers his brother, only to discover a whole village of people to whom Ed is a sort of leader, and they don't want to come back to Earth. Things get messy when the federal government gets involved. No shocker there, eh? And even worse when a sentient native species to Oblivion finally makes its presence known to humanity. There are definitely shades of several other sci-fi stories threaded throughout Oblivion Song, and tropes aplenty of the genre are liberally peppered throughout the series. I picked up this series in its chapter story arc format, which collected several issues into a total of 6 of these chapters, each one containing one major arc of the overall tale. Initially, I was considering reviewing each chapter individually. However, given that the series is complete, with no logical opening for a sequel or companion series to it, and with Kirkman definitively declaring that the series was completed and the story told, I am opting to analyze and review it as an entirety by itself. So let's break down Oblivion Song. Characters, 6 out of 10. Reading from my notes. Robert Kirkman has a talent for creating some compelling lead characters, and Nathan Cole of Oblivion Song is certainly an interesting fellow upon early inspection. A brilliant scientist, brave but thoughtful in his plans of action, and possessed of a fairly solid moral/ethical compass, he is a solid example of a kind of Renaissance man. His brother Ed is slightly less well developed, character-wise, until near the very end of the story, and I'll get more to that later, and is just differentiated enough to rise above the status of an archetype character. His disagreements with Nathan are his strongest moments, displaying a much-needed perspective beyond Nathan's. The last main character of the series that I'd like to highlight here momentarily is Gozan Kuthal, a member of Oblivion's native alien race who, for all intents and purposes, seems to be an oddly logical, if completely homicidal, version of his people's representation of a sort of Lieutenant Worf type character from Star Trek The Next Generation and DS9. Sadly, and the reason that points come off from this category, is that most of the series' principal cast outside of these three characters are less than developed archetypes, stereotypes, and also rans, even when initially they are visually depicted as more important to the story. Thankfully, the most frequent of these recurring characters, Director Ward, is written well enough that despite his flip-flopping late into the run of the story, he makes for an understandable and relatable total support character, and by relatable I mean he plays well into his role. Plot. 6 out of 10. I want to preface this section with the following caveat. The primary conceit of this series in the early going was both interesting and superbly well executed. Though it relies on some fair amount of genre tropes in exploratory sci-fi, it does so with skillful aplomb. Where it stumbles, unfortunately, is in the back half of the series, lapsing into an overused framework of humanity versus the other/aliens, which is just one big misunderstanding. We've seen that a lot. The biggest reason that this doesn't drop the score for this area all the way down to a 4 for me, though, is that the rationale of the aliens and their methodologies remains consistent throughout the series from the moment it's introduced until the tail end. World-building mechanics, 9 out of 10. This is where Kirkman and De Felici's Oblivion Song absolutely shines, and the visual art style is to be praised for its efficacy in this regard when it is done well. From the Cronenbergian fleshy alien environments to its peculiar wildlife, the various tribes of the alien race, even to the sketchy and non-jargon world traversal technology, for which I'm grateful. Not all sci-fi needs to have an attached symposium or dictionary or glossary of terms, thank you. Oblivion Song sets a high benchmark for sci-fi comic stories anchored in an otherwise mundane, Earth-like reality. Storytelling technique, 5 out of 10. This is one of the weaker elements of this series as an overall whole, and it suffers in part due to moments of ham-fisted messaging, coming from a glaringly obvious socio-political bent. For example, Nathan and Ed display obvious and overt out-group preferences, a hallmark of the political left. There's Ed's community, which seems to have elements of small c communism in place. There's also the humans bad and will always corrupt places they go and extract all worth callously messaging at the very tail end of the story, and that was done very heavy-handedly. There's also the fact that some of the artwork was, well, sloppy looking and inconsistent in long swaths. I'm no skilled visual artist myself, but the aesthetic of Oblivion Song, where it was detailed and finely drawn, was brilliantly alien and weird. It was greatly done. But when it pulled back on the level of detail, the presentation suffered, usually with nothing to provide a positive offset for my tastes. Pacing, 3 out of 10. Folks, the truly ugly element of this series, one that I was holding back judgment on until I did a little background digging research into the matter, the pacing at which the overarching plot of the series unfurls might not, at first glance and in total, give one a headache, but when one actually sits down and reads through Oblivion Song in a short period of time, it is unavoidable to notice that some sections build up at a snail's pace, while other sections advance events and characters at a breakneck speed that feels completely unnatural. This whipsaw sensation that results from the lurch then sprint presentation takes away a lot of the ability of those who are trying to in order to enjoy the narrative, because it ends up feeling deeply imbalanced. The biggest example of this is Edward Cole's backstory. Throughout the series, we only get hints about his Earth life before the transference event. Implications about what may have strained his and Nathan's relationship as brothers. Then, at the very tail end, in the last section of the entire series, readers are presented with an 8-page blitz covering all of that backstory in small vignette flashbacks. It's jarring, and within the confines of when it is presented, it feels unsettled and rushed. Bear in mind, this series wasn't abruptly cancelled. Kirkman knew his development guidelines in advance. He set them up. He just bungled the timing, quite frankly, and badly. In conclusion, mathematically, Oblivion Song would only average out to a 5.8, but I give it a small bump based on the fact that, well, there is something unique about this. Oblivion Song serves well enough as an example of a limited comic book series, a singular story told in a limited number of issues or collections. In that regard, as a standalone story, a standalone series, this is the entire thing right here, all done in one shot. That's a rare thing, because in comic books, we often have ongoing series, reboots, sequels, and quite frankly, kicking a dead horse. So it makes this kind of rare. But is that rarity worth the cost of collecting the series? Let's consider the following value proposition. When the series was in its scheduled release frame, 1 issue per month, it was $4 per issue. Not much. And it ran for 36 issues. All totaled, that's $144. But again, over 36 months. I personally got it in its story arc chapter collections, totaling $109 roughly. The one-shot compendium hardcover collection that covers the entire series can be purchased for $120. All in all, I accidentally got it in its most entirely cheapest format. But I only bought 1 chapter per week. The first one was only $10, and the rest of them come in at around $20. It's kind of how they hook you in. The entry level is low cost. Try to get you invested. Yet with the overall visual art style frequently being, well, less than impressive, the format being one that doesn't typically accrue value, typically your chapter by chapter or multi-issue collections like this, they don't really go up in value over time. My analysis ratings also come in, and those are largely middling in average total. I would have to say the following. No. As much as I admire Kirkman's The Walking Dead, Oblivion Song is definitely not that. And in the current economic environment, it is not worth its price tag. And I recognize I'm saying that after having bought the damn thing. But I don't feel that it was a complete waste, per se, because I definitely would have preferred to have something, well, I would consider of higher quality story and characters, and a much better pace would help out, given what I paid. But in the long run, I'm in an okay enough position where this didn't hurt me that badly financially. In the end, however, I would only recommend Oblivion Song for Robert Kirkman diehards or sci-fi fans who can find this entire collection for some price tag under $75. Don't pay what I paid. Try to find it cheaper. That's all for now, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.